first winter, this is what they do. They'll disperse across the landscape, and they're creating these grazing foraging patches that they're cratering through the snow. Unlike a horse or an elk that will paw through the snow, these guys use their foreheads to shift that snow away. They do it in a sweeping side-to-side pattern. They have the broadest incisor bar, lower teeth, of any ungulate in North America, and they act like just a rhythmic lawnmower going back and forth, back and forth. And once the snow's gone in the spring, this is what it looks like. That's a grazing patch. It's often only 1 meter or 2 square. Over time, they can become grazing lawns, in some cases the size of this room. And they're very short grazed patches within the taller grassland community. This is the first place to green up in the spring. It's got the most sunlight, the most moisture, and as a result, this is what it looks like throughout the summer months. That's that same patch grazed and then the ungrazed around it. And that grazing behavior is what drove bison ecology across North America for tens of thousands of years, because they seek these grazed patches out and they regraze them over and over and over during the growing season. They're constantly shifting around, looking not for the tall stuff, but for the previously grazed stuff, because it was the most nutritious, instantly digestible, highly nutritious vegetation. And that pattern of constant movement across the prairies continued until the grass is cured in early to middle August. And as soon as the grass is cured and stopped producing new growth, then the behavior of the bison changes. And then bison were then scattered over a vast area. And this is what it looks like during the summer months at the peak of grazing in grasslands. And the color variation is species variation and grazing intensity variation. And it's incredibly complex. And it's that complexity that allows the diversity of species to return to the landscape. So to help people understand a little bit about grassland ecology on that landscape, I did this sketch showing that it's a very diverse grassland community. There's lots of different grassland grasses there, but there are no flowering plants. There's no forbs. And this is what took place after the cattle were removed from grasslands. Eventually, the forbs were outcompeted by the grasses, and it became a grass-dominated landscape. And grasses have the unique ability to put down roots, 2 meters, 3 meters deep in the soil to extract moisture from it. But they're long, fibrous, fragile root systems. Put bison back on that landscape and it begins to change, because as they create those grazing lawns and they maintain them over time, the grasses can't sustain that level of use. The root systems begin to shrink up towards the surface and create space for forbs to come in. Now, the one on the left, for example, is winter fat. It's a plant that cattle will gain fat on right through the winter months. Most plants down here will have a crude protein level of 5 to 10% at the most. The winter fat carries a 22% crude protein right through the winter. So highly nutritious for everything that's out there. And it has a taproot, unlike the grasses. And over time, as those grazing lawns and patches increase in size, there's an increasing complexity of flowering plants that come with that, all of which have taproots. This is a Nuttall's cottontail or mountain cottontail. And eventually you end up with an incredibly complex ecosystem, rich with small mammal life and birds and insects, flowering plants, grasses. The whole system is functioning the way it should. And this is the way Grasslands National Park is now. And that bison paddy in itself now contains another completely functioning ecosystem, because not all of the bacteria and fungi that pass through the bison are digested. Some of them survive, and they arrive intact in that bison paddy. And the second it's on the landscape, and I mean the second, there are flies sitting on the back of the bison waiting for it. It's populated first by the things that it traveled with, the bacteria, fungi, and protozoa. But within minutes, the predators begin to arrive. Beetles, dung-feeding beetles, mixed fly diets, dung-feeding flies. And then within a very short time, the predators of these ones arrive. And this is just a very short list of species that are in there. So these guys have the amazing ability to see a dung pat from a tremendous distance. They can see this column of inorganic compounds that it's invisible, but to them it's not. It's the equivalent to a campfire smoke that we can see from a tremendous distance. These guys will fly through an oxygen-rich environment and then splat headfirst into an anaerobic environment. Instantaneously, there's suddenly no oxygen left. So the first thing they do is hold their breath and then quickly burrow to the surface and create these chambers and tunnels to allow oxygen to get into the dung pad. And then they hunt the fungi and bacteria and protozoa that are swimming around in that liquid dung pad, not the dung itself. So to help folks understand dung beetle ecology a little bit, I did this drawing to show that there's 3 different guilds of dung beetles. The ones we're always familiar with are the rollers, the classic African dung beetle that's rolling a little ball of elephant dung. In this case, these guys will arrive at the dung, they'll take a little brood ball piece out of it and then roll it across the landscape, lay 1 egg in it, and then go back and get another one and go back and forth, doing that repeatedly. And they'll create chambers like that throughout the dung pad. And then along come the burriers. And these are the ones that are critically important to grassland health, historically and even today. And there's 2 guilds of burying dung beetles, the fast burying and the slow burying. And again, the female will create a chamber and then dig a deep tunnel system down deep into the soil, upwards of 1 meter to 1.5 meters, depending on soil type. Which is critically important because not only is she taking that dung that deep into the chambers below there, but those burrow systems act as water infiltration routes. So she's providing nutrients to the base of those grassland roots and moisture at the same time. And then along come species like the long-billed curlew, having a snack on some dung beetles, or the McGowan's longspur. They also love to eat these guys. If you're out again on a full moon night on the prairies, dung beetles are the only insect on the planet that use celestial navigation in their reproductive cycle. And on a full moon night, you'll see these adult females rolling brood balls away from the dung pad directly towards the full moon. And if there's no full moon, they use the Milky Way to navigate. And it's a way for them to disperse their offspring away from the dung pad. Really quite a remarkable adaptation.